White Lotus is the show of antagonisms. So that means it's the show of squashed birds, like we talked about in the last video. There are unseen things or people who pay a bodily price for you to be what you are in the world. So, it takes work to follow through your own position to get to those squashed birds. But generally, an antagonism is basically how you're structured at each other's throats, basically, without it being like this neat one-for-one relationship. Like there's a incommensurate gap with what you're structured around. So a simple version of that is like Vengeance with Hatfield and McCoy's, where you're both structured on an enemy figure and you both see the world, differently, but in a way that's locked together. And so like, how do you break and change that ground? Like the antagonism is the structural ground for you to be what you are as a subject, as a human being. Sex antagonism is not a men are from Mars, women are from Venus, but the way in which masculinity and femininity engage the world differently, structure you psychically differently. And there's not a one-to-one correspondence between these two structures. There's a, when the man looks at the woman, or the masculine position looks at the feminine position, he sees something different from what the feminine position is, and vice versa. So that's why when you talk about like the perfect couple, what we see in the person we love is mobilized by these fantasy formations on top of the person that we see. We can't get to their psychic position directly. With Levi-Strauss, very classically, we're talking about like a primitive society that is split by a class antagonism, and when you ask people from each side to depict their society, they have a very different picture of what they are, like how their class is or actually organized. And so we get to that gap, the gap in which you can't have a one-to-one correspondence, you can't see the same thing. But with White Lotus season 3, we get a really clear, like beautifully formal depiction of the trauma of having a father, what's inherently traumatic to it, and the deadlock that we get to there in the conclusion really lends itself to what's open about that trauma and doesn't have any set interpretation. You can interpret and chew over the antagonism we get to in all different number of ways, and I don't think one takes precedence over the other. Fatherhood is a very interesting subject. Where we've made it dark, it gets to the antagonism of having a father in the zombie apocalypse, which is also the stuff of my favorite zombie apocalypse works, like The Last of Us or Telltale's Walking Dead Game 2 or The Road. It's a lot more than just like how does one be a father in the apocalypse. It's the real problem is how does one have a father in the zombie apocalypse. So that is the essence of where we've made it dark. So check it out if you'd like. But thanks for watching this video to the end, and I really appreciate it if you like and subscribe. The move that White Lotus always makes is to show at the outset that there's a deadly struggle going on, that like what's at stake is who a person is. And we see that through while being on vacation at the White Lotus. And we get to what's often a radical conclusion. So we're going to talk about that conclusion, but knowing that conclusion ahead of time is useful for watching the whole show again. But the wonderful alienation that we start with Walter Goggins' character Rick is the intense alienation of being on vacation itself, which is my own psychic experience when I'm on vacation. But he goes on vacation with his partner Chelsea, and he doesn't want to be on vacation, so the question is why? And we find out it's because he's pursuing the person who murdered his father. And what's he going to do when he confronts him? So the whole story of Rick is getting to this point. And this confrontation gets staged twice. So again, dialectically, we're drilling through what's really the problem here. We need to not just do it once, but twice. Twice is what gets to the real issue. The first time is what should be the right way to do it. He penetrates the person's home, which is hard to do. He gets him alone. He says, "You ruined my life," and he shows that he could murder the murderer of his father and get justice, but he gives it up and realizes how pathetic the person who's in front of him is. He's an old man who's on his last leg, basically, but also a wealthy, important person in Thailand. And Rick lifts him up from his chair, flops him on the ground, and gets out of there, leaves, and he feels satisfied afterwards. He's done the thing that he needed to do. So he's a hollow person up until this point. We don't know what his deal is, other than the fact that he's able to go to this wealthy place and he's just this hollowed out person who is structured on the life he lived without his parents. Like he's structured on not having parents, and the trauma of that. So he finally gets what he most desires, his dream. But it's fatefully as he has all he wants that he gets a confrontation again with the man who killed his father. And he says, as one might expect, your parents were no saints, you're better off living without them. In the end, like, he's brutal. He also does a power move of being like, you're not going to hurt me now, I'm armed. And it's devastating to Rick. That little bit causes his world to shatter. His whole world is built on this fantasy that his parents were good people who had their lives taken away too early. And so the resentment he feels towards the world gets put all onto that, this void of parenthood. And so, Rick should just still walk away. He should be, if everything is just fine like it was a minute ago, he should be able to just walk away, but he can't. His psychic structure has crumbled, and he has to do the one thing he came to do, which is kill the murderer of his father, which is what he does, abruptly. And it's here that we find out immediately that the man he just shot was his actual father. And having just gunned down this important man at his hotel, there's a shootout, and Rick and Chelsea die. And they're floating in a lily pad pond, and Rick is the body that we see that starts the story of season 3, although it's more oblique than in the previous seasons. But so they leave in body bags together, and there's a big theme of reincarnation, how Chelsea, who's very into New Age stuff, is trying to save Rick from himself, from doing this terrible thing, which happens, but they'll stick together in the afterlife, with reincarnation. The first thing to keep in mind is a problem of identity that gets unearthed here with fatherhood. There's a very fundamental way in which no one knows who our fathers are. This ties to just the problem of identity itself, where whatever the identity is, but especially with fatherhood or being a king, that there's a gap between the body that fills that position and the identity itself. Like, what the identity upholds for the world is greater than the person who's doing it. It's not about being this psychotic thing that fully latches into what the role is. What our father is for us is structurally the structure that pushes us out into the world. We foster our growth, but we push you out into the world. So this pushing out is another degree of alienation from this thing that's been fostering you and telling you how to become a person. So you need to get to this fundamental point of being pushed out of the nest. So it's a funny reversal of the antagonism we get in Star Wars, where it's Luke, I am your father. The bad guy here is saying, I'm not your father, but he actually is too. Why? And the why is enigmatic. There are multiple things at work here. So the father who refuses to say, I'm your father, and targets the idea of the father who's slain, says, it's not a good guy, it's a bad guy. That's all it really takes. He is destroying the fantasy that structures Rick, and is saying, let go of it more fully than you've let go of it. Because obviously up to this point, Rick is structured on this, I need to get revenge, and he gives up the revenge, just like we're watching The Last of Us or something. So we break out of vengeance, but it's not about vengeance here that we're dealing with. We're dealing with fatherhood. So to be a man, or the man, Rick's real father is saying, give up this way of structuring yourself on this good guy father who was slain when you were a kid. Be a full man and stop, leeching on my fatherhood. Give up the structure of fatherhood entirely, which Rick's not able to do. But the conservative thing here too is this man who abandoned Rick as a child is abandoning Rick as an adult here as well. He gets Rick's story of here's my fantasy. It's like a kid who's going up to him with this picture he drew. Like, here's the fantasy I made of you, Dad, and he's saying, get away from me. He's rejecting Rick's love. There's no happy reunion here at all. He's saying, I'm worthless, right? He's saying, I'm no saint. Let go of me. He's refusing to be a ghost for Rick, and he goes off to live his wealthy, enjoyable life, what's left of it, And that's the thing that Rick can't abide. Like, Rick is traumatized by, he's stuck at the hotel. He can't get off the boat, get on the boat to go home yet. And he's just watching his father, he doesn't know is his father, enjoy being wealthy and powerful. And that's too much for him. That's the life that the father built in rejection of Rick and parenting him, rejecting his role as being a parent. So it's a simultaneous embrace of his role as father and rejection of it. And a bit weirdly, there's a real parallel between these two people. Rick, we don't know much about Rick. He is just this void of a person who's structured on all of this, antagonism of having a slain father, and how he's not able to be a full person without it. He needs the help of his partner entirely to function. We don't get a good picture of his life, but we see the way in which it's very close to his actual father's, where he has wealth and it's got a dark underbelly. He has a friend who can get him a gun, no problem. So, this whole, Thailand being this fantasy space for people who aren't Epstein class, but are unable to hide their dark underbellies, so they go out to a place like Thailand where they can be rich and do illicit things. Rick's part of that too. So there's a way in which Rick became his father. So in the first part, the failure is Rick's, where the message of his father is, let go of the fantasy of me entirely. Don't hold on to this achieved vengeance that you think you have. Just let go of building yourself off of this ghost of a father. And, Rick obviously fails. But there's also the failure of the father who could be some degree of a father, but also just keep his mouth shut. It's blatantly excessive that he gets his one-uppance on his son. And obviously that's about the father's own ego, basically, his own perception of self and the revenge at having been made vulnerable. Like, how dare you? So there's a fatherly position to that about reasserting himself as father over Rick. But the thing is, that move is not letting go of your son. So he drags Rick right back down, and makes Rick fall apart as a consequence. So instead of pushing Rick out, is one possible reading, he is not letting go and saying, don't you dare forget me. And that's what makes them both die. So there the failure is fully on the father, with his revenge. But in the third reading, this whole catastrophe is a gift to Rick, where the death that he gets with Chelsea is the most beautiful and impactful thing that could happen, where if they were to go back home, they'd be living boring lives that no one cares about anymore. But we as viewers remember the tragedy of their story here, how Rick faithfully couldn't let go of this father figure that he needed to let go of to be a full person. And the love of Chelsea is real, but not enough. There's a lack of radicality there. But we're saying, it's more radical that they die together and, go off into reincarnation to stage again in the freedom of a new life, this fantasized new life, of being partners in the next life where Rick is actually free of this whole problem with his father. And this reading is difficult because there are two directions one can read it that are either conservative or radical. The conservative one is the position of courtly love, where we destroy what's actually around us and create this fantasy version of it in order to keep what's traumatic at bay. So the trauma of love, the trauma of Rick having to actually love Chelsea, which is very clear with this whole story. Rick is pushing Chelsea back constantly, and Chelsea's getting too tight. Love me, let me in. Love me, let me in. So in dying together, Rick gets the fantasized version that allows him to finally properly love and be with Chelsea. So that's all false. If we were to stage this whole thing and get to life with Chelsea, there needs to be something open and traumatic about it that Rick is holding off, keeping from accessing because he's so caught up on his father. But the other version of it is the fact of trauma in the world, of things that should not happen, does in fact create situations where the terrible thing that happened penetrates reality itself and becomes part of eternity. So this is something that we see happen constantly with the horrors of our world, where innocent people die and should not die, and a picture is taken, a detail is given, and that detail sticks in our memory permanently. It's not just this like coping mechanism. It just happens on its own. It's not just like what we make of the terrors of the world, but we memorialize things, and that memorializing grounds reality going forward. So, that's the beautiful reading of this terrible conclusion. So the radical breaking out is that violence and the moment of life that Rick gets free from his father truly. Even though, again, like Oedipus faithfully slaying his father without knowing it. But, the life he gets carrying Chelsea and the life he gets in death is a different mode of existence. So that is what's traumatic and antagonistic about having a father, and how we can't just, hold on to some vengeance story, an Inigo Montoya replacement that puts at bay what's traumatic about having a father and traumatic about breaking off and being in love with someone else. Everything Rick does is trying to flee his partner, and his partner is saying, no, we love each other. And how do you get to that love? How do you structurally break into it?